Hello, this is Team Foxtrot. Uh, we are here to put a video together just explaining what we did for this project over the course of the semester. But first I want to start off with a description of what we did, what the purpose of the project was, and then also an overview of React. Um, so we worked with Andy, Sean, and Alex and kind of developed some components for the website. We developed 12 widgets that could be parameterized and plugged into the website where they need it. And we will be showing these off in Storybook, so we kind of attach them there so they can be tested and viewed in different combinations of functionality. Um, all right, so for this project we use React, and this allows us to compartmentalize our UI components uh, and kind of just separate them into their own class or module, and that way that they can be used wherever they need to be used, and they'll work cross-platform. So it just kind of makes it easier to work with UI components. Um, yeah. So basically, React for us, the way it fits into our project, we have a bunch of different components stored in different folders, and for each of those components, they'll take different properties passed into them, and this will kind of dictate how they'll look and function. And that's pretty much the basis of what we did with this project.
All right, now that we've explained the project, there are a few prerequisites you have to meet before you can actually view, debug, and test the functionality of your components in Storybook. The first of which is rather simple, but is possibly the most important step. You need to make sure that each and every one of your components are properly exported. This can be done in two ways. First, for a functional component such as this select box that you will find in the registry of components that we have created, which is a functional component, you need to simply invoke at the end of the code this simple export default and the name of your component, in this case select box. However, if you're using a class-based component, as is the case with the async component or the async select component, you'll need to take a little more of a complicated step, in which when you invoke the creation of the command of the class, you simply need to add export default to the beginning of the command. So export default class, the name of your component itself, and then if you're going to extend anything like component or anything else, you'll add this to the end here. Now that you've properly exported the component, you need to create an index.story.js file. You'll notice in the example of select over here on the side that it is stored in the same folder as the index file that contains your component. Opening up this component and this file, you'll find that there are three key things you need to perform. First, and before I say anything, ignore these options here. They are simply props passed into the component when it is rendered in Storybook. The first of which is you need to make three import statements. Import React itself, import the stories of function from Storybook React, and finally import the component itself, in this case select box. The second step is to invoke the stories of function, passing in components this string here, which is what name you want your components and the subsequent stories to appear under in Storybook, as well as just a simple module reference here. And finally, you need to use the .add commands. You can do as many of these as you want, but basically how these work is you will pass in a string for the name of the story, with a comma, use a lambda function to actually invoke the component, passing in the props as you normally would a React component, and then do this as many times as you want, and they should be added in. However, before these can actually render in Storybook, there's one more step you need to take. In your source folder, you will find a folder called stories containing an index.js file. Clicking on that, you will find a ton of import statements. You need to make one of these statements for your own index.story.js file, simply following this procedure. It'll be a string. You need to import and use the dot to reference the source file, dash components, dash the name of your folder that your components index.story.js file is stored in, and then index.story. If you're using a TSX file for your index.story rather than index.story.js, you will simply do index.story.tsx. Now that we have accomplished this, looking at the command prompt here, there's two simple things you need to do. First, what you need to do is you need to point your directory to the package.app folder If you're in the package.app folder like we already are, that is all you need to do. However, normally you will start in the affordable folder itself, so you need to simply invoke a cd package -app to point to the app folder, and then from here we run the yarn storybook command, which this loads for a while, but you will be met once you load it with Storybook right here.
All right, hello everybody. It is Reed here from Team Foxtrot. I developed the card component, and I'm going to quickly review it to give a quick overview of kind of how we did all of our components here. This on the screen is how Affordable currently has their cards. They use them to display this information about their grants from the past and that their new updates that are coming in. So I took that in mind when I designed these, and here are the new cards that I have that have not been implemented yet, but currently very simple. They take in a couple different types of text. They scale to the size of the page. They could take in images as well. So I guess they don't really have any images yet, but nice little heart logo, and then there's a bigger image test. You could change the positioning of the images and positioning of the text and everything. But in the code, the card component consists of a couple props here. There's no states. So as you saw in the storybook, the header is that bold text at the top. The meta is kind of the mini bio about the card, and then the description can be like a lot more text. And the cards scale to like the size, the amount of text that's in there. So I added this test to see how it would handle overflow of text. And as you can see here, there's default props, even though you probably shouldn't use those because you're trying to convey your update information weekly and monthly. But here's the code. I use the semantic UI JavaScript framework because the OSU widget group and us at JCU kind of agreed that this was kind of a good baseline for our components to have a similar style across the board. There's over 3,000 theming variables in semantic UI, and as a team we used it for our text input, our text container, our async images, cards, radio buttons, and checkboxes. So when all of this is implemented onto the website, we'll see a more consistent style and theme across the board. Well, yeah, that's basically the whole overview of the relatively simple card component. Here's the story file. So these cards right here, you can see are getting rendered right here. And yeah.
Hello everyone, this is Jonathan again from Team Foxtrot, here to run you through the select box component. So what I accomplished here in writing this select box component was to make a sort of upgrade to the drop-down list that they already have in the affordable website. This is what it looks like in its default form, and comparing this to what's in the affordable website, you find that it's not bland, but it's very much at its basic functionality. It's your default blue, kind of select highlight, you can select things. Very simple. Ours follows the same basic principles, but it, in my opinion, looks very much sleeker in design. You're able to customize the color of the highlighted option, and it even has this very nifty clear out button that you can clear and open it right back up for you to select another option. So looking under the hood at this component, we find that there are 4 main props that govern it, or 5, my pardon. Options, label message, searchable, disabled, and callback. Callback has nothing to do with the functionality. That is more for invoking and passing data between components. But these 4 main props, you'll find that they are plugged directly into a call to the React select, with the label message being a passed prop that sends a little label, as you can see here. The what's your status, that is passed in as a prop. But you'll find that the customizability of this prop, or this component, comes in the form of the is searchable, is disabled props, and especially as you can see, you have searchable and disabled up there. These are the two main customizable components. For example, if you set searchable to false, then going back to Storybook, and this is the case in the non-searchable story, you will find that whenever you try to type things out and search for a specific option here, you can't do anything. No matter how much I type, I'm not sure if you could hear the clicks, but nothing goes in. This is compared to the default version that you can type at admin and it'll filter down the options. Meanwhile, if you set the disabled prop to true, then you are unable to interact with the component at all. This gives you the flexibility to lock down a select box if you're in a situation where you don't have enough data yet or you're not sure the user's choice path to confirm what they want to do here. Finally, I kind of lied when I said there were two main props that govern this. There's actually a third customizable option that come from the options. The options prop right here. Normally, you will pass your options in this form, which is a simple array of objects that have a value and a label component. However, if you pass the options as objects containing those objects, then what you'll find with this specific label and options value, what you'll find is you can create grouped options within your select box, allowing a much neater sort of the options available to the user, making them not have to look as hard for the things that they're looking for in their options. You can see this in the grouped options story, where when you pass down the select, you have group 1 and group 2's worth of options. So you can select option 1 in group 1, and you can select option 1 in group 2. Now, it's hard to see, but you can click each one, they all work perfectly, and this way when the user's looking for something, they can see, and you can customize these groups to be specific categorizable categories, and then looking at each one, the user will be able to more easily find the option that they are looking for. So that basically is the functionality of the select box.
Hello everyone, I am Justin from Team Foxtrot, and I'll give you guys a brief overview of all the components that we worked on for our project. So the full list of components that we worked on is available at the user's guide and programmer's manual that you'll find linked in the description of this video. They're very helpful and will give you a good understanding and better understanding than this video probably, but this video will just serve as like a brief kind of overview for all of the components that we kind of did. So to start off, the text input, there's a good amount of different stories we have for this one because it shows like the different theming options and styled components and passwords and disabling. There's the option to toggle icons and have callbacks for like when you click on it. Password, I could enter in that and show and hide it. There's a password type. So there's a lot to this text input. Very interesting. You can check more about that in the programmer's manual and user guide. The button JCU component that we worked on has a lot of different kinds. It has like you can specify like the kind via prop, and there's different types of different things that would happen depending on what kind of button you determine it to be. So next, for example, we'll have like the next text and a little right arrow icon here. So these buttons can be used to like create different pages. And for example, I have a demo here with the pagination that can go through the different pages and have different components displayed depending on like the current page. So yeah, that's the button. So text, this is pretty I think self-explanatory. It's mostly just the text, HTML text can be rendered inline or as a block, so basically using a span or a paragraph, and that's determined also by a property called inline. The decorations can also be added with depending on the look you're going for the current text. So we have some demos here showing that. The text container just serves to kind of contain all the text, and it can also have like semantic headings. This story I recommend you check out, and yeah, all the story files, you can kind of click on the component and get to those to kind of see how they're implemented, and go off of them a lot and our documentation in the that we have up here for the programmer's manual and user's guide. So yeah, those are nice, and we have the basic table. So the basic table takes in a huge array of data and displays them in this kind of like table over here. And these are all, they could either be sortable, filterable, or resizable and collapsible. So here's one that kind of collapsed, and you can search it. So like if I want to search for a specific name, I can click on this input here and click on that. This one is sortable, so you can click on these right here. And there's a lot of customization you can do with these tables. So very interesting. And you got the your standard checkboxes and toggles in this little story over here. You can see all the sliders, and yeah, they're good. And the radio buttons as well, which are kind of similar. You can click on them and pass in prop to determine like the different options. Cards I won't go over since that was already covered earlier, but yeah, those are very nice and they look really good. The map is a bit more complex. It uses Google Maps API key and Google Maps API, and there's an API key that you guys need to be able to actually make the request to Google to have this map actually show. So you'll need to get that key, which and put that into the environment variable or the environment file here. And yeah, that's called Google Map. The environment variable is called Google Map key, which all that's noted in the programmer's manual. So you should be able to get that working. And the yeah, and there's also different map modes for the map, so you can display like the directions and have the container be fluid, so it scales to the parent container. And then yeah, we also have some additional examples using maps and other inputs here that are pretty cool that we could demo and show how like all these components kind of work together. So I recommend checking this demo out. This one's in the map story. So yeah, and then this is the data grid table. So the data grid table is a basically very more complicated version of basic table. It uses a different node package as it's kind of a root and backend. So it has a lot more options. It can edit, delete, and filter. And yeah, there's a lot to this table. So a lot of things that you can do with this. So how to import this through props is all detailed in the programmer's manual as well. So yeah, and then we have select box, and all these select boxes actually work pretty similarly. Jonathan, I believe, went through the select box, so you should be able to understand how that kind of works. They're all passed in through props. All these are the async ones. If you type in, it'll actually simulate it loading and trying to search for the option that you have here. So for large amounts of data, that could come in handy. So it looks a bit better, and you can actually tell that the component's doing something while it's loading. We have a sample form, which kind of shows like a little like branch of like options that you can use with the selects. So these are also really cool. The async images are just images that have different loading phases. So placeholder phase, the low res phase, and then high res. So this one just has the placeholder and then the high res. So it goes from low to high. And these are this one's loaded from the assets folder in the affordable repo, which is in the source, in the assets source test directory right here. So you'll see the cat images here. So those are all here. And yeah, then we also have a real example. So this actually loads this image from an external web server. So this is not simulated, not using set timeout or anything to simulate loading. This actually shows it how it would look. So if we open Chrome DevTools to make sure that caching is disabled, so it doesn't automatically save the image, you can see that how it kind of loads in. And if I refresh the web page, it'll actually show the placeholder first while it loads, and then there it is. So that's just a real application example of how the async would work, because these are kind of some async components are kind of hard to test, so they definitely could use some more testing. But I think these stories kind of help a lot with that, and this one just shows multiple images all loading, and this one features the low res, so these are all really interesting. So yeah, and they also have callbacks, and you can have your own components behave differently and change state. So date picker, these are cool. So you can select a date and have different options to like disable like weekends and select certain days. You can have portals and have this little pop up here and select the date. So that would be useful for like different forms. These are older buttons. They're just there because they're left over from the previous code that was here. They're not exactly important, but currently some of the code, some of the pages still rely on like the older components. Like there's an older text input too. You'll see in the code, not that's different. So keep that in mind as you change components and implement them. So and then these last few components were developed by OSU. So OSU will have more details regarding on how these all work. So yeah, those are the components we worked on. Yeah. So to wrap things up, a final note about future plans and ambitions for where we kind of left off. Since we merged our code with OSU's components over here, there were a few styling conflicts that arose. Some of which were sorted out, but we probably did not get everything. So those are important to keep in mind as you kind of use these components or add to the styling and standardize the theming, because that could cause a few issues. The text, for example, we've had to put in a temporary fix for the font family because Bootstrap, when we merged it, caused the font that they used wouldn't let the bolding to actually work. So there are, I think, a few things that could be sorted out. The text specifically could use styled components possibly to alleviate that. So styled components, which the text input currently uses, is a valid solution to standardize the theming and basically abstract a lot of the styling that's kind of just used as props. So this kind of lets us dynamically use the CSS and customize our components theming so it's consistent throughout. Semantic helped a bit with this, but Semantic has its own default styling, so styled components is very powerful, and we highly recommend that to standardize theming you kind of use this and make maybe like a prop for called theme, and maybe expand upon this theme enum that we have and make it a class or something, and kind of just expand upon this and make it so it's standardized throughout all the components, and all of them can use maybe styled components, and this can all be abstracted to a theme prop and styled components can wrap something around here. So yeah, that would be one of the main, I guess, future ambitions and ways forward for our components. And yeah, so the next thing to probably mention is page implementation. So to implement the components, you have to go to pages, and which are, I believe, in their own folder here, and you could go to the different pages and see how they're actually done. So there's a lot of pages here, but you can see that usually their own, a lot of these are their own component, but there's a lot here that you can look at, and you can just kind of import the component up here, and then use it in the page that you wish to implement it in. And sometimes you might have to, and when using React Native so that it compiles on the Android and iOS, some components may have to be tweaked so that they're using React Native components instead of HTML. But yeah, so those would be some tweaks that might have to be made to some of these components as well that you'll have to look out for. The other thing, I guess the final thing to mention that we just didn't do was the standardized error handling. So a lot of our components will produce console log errors or console logs, and async images will produce an error, and there'll be some compiler errors for props that are required, but standardized error codes and a good error system doesn't really exist with our components. So that would be something to add that would be very beneficial to components that would otherwise misbehave or have an issue with, and help troubleshoot. So that's it. That's it for our overview. Make sure to check out the the programmer's manual and user guide, which we'll link in the description. So thanks for watching. Good luck and bye.